Now that Moons of Elsweyr has been released, I wanted to make a video that would highlight some of the cards that I felt like were safe to craft. I did a very similar video when Alliance War came out, and this list is not necessarily going to be highlighting what I think are the best cards overall, but instead just ones that I think are safe to craft, meaning they will likely see play in one way, shape, or form, and I fully expect them to be staples in certain kinds of decks, so that makes them safe to craft. And if you're looking for ways to spend your gems wisely, these would fit the bill. So, right out of the gate, I'm going to start with Frazzled Alfiq, aka the Pikachu Kitty. This is a 2-drop, and the reason that this one is safe to craft, in my opinion, is because if you're going to run any sort of deck that's going to be heavy on the wax and wane, the lunar, if you will, mechanic, this is going to be a big part of it. There are some lunar cards that I think will find homes in decks without going heavy on the theme, but if you are building a lunar themed deck, this card is almost a requirement. It's integral, largely because it's a very quality 2-drop even by itself, because the 1/2 body is okay, right? It's not great, but it becomes a vanilla 2/3 with upside if you're playing it on the wane side of things. And if you're playing it on the wax side of things, I think what a lot of people miss is that this is deal 1 damage, not deal 1 damage to your opponent. So you get to choose the target every time this triggers. So when you are, again, in a lunar themed deck and you're playing a lot of cards with the wax and the wane triggers, this thing kind of becomes a machine gun, and you can really use it to inflict pain on your opponent, right? You can deal direct damage to them, but you can also just kind of make their life miserable, because as long as this is on the board, you might be able to set up some favorable trades for you, unfavorable trades for them. In the past, you know, if you could trade into a creature and yours would survive, that would be very favorable, but this card might negate some of that. It's just got a lot of utility on such a small body. I've already seen it perform very well in a few lunar decks, so if you're looking to build a lunar themed deck, this one is kind of a requirement in my opinion. Now, there was another theme that was introduced in Moons of Elsweyr, and that theme was Consume. Now, the next card that I'm going to show you as a safe to craft does have Consume, but I don't think that it needs to be in Consume heavy decks. This is Alfiq Conjurer. So this card is kind of a monster. It is a 6-cost 3/4 with Guard, but on summon you consume a creature to summon a Flame Atronach. So I'm not even going to read the rest of the card. Just right there, if you're playing this and consuming a creature, you're paying 6 to essentially get an 8/7 worth of stats split across 2 creatures, one with Breakthrough, one with Guard. The guard version survives Ice Storm with 4 health. That's entirely relevant. Yes, the Flame Atronach has been a bit brittle in the past. It does die to a lot of removal, but this is still a really just good quality play on 6 if you just want stats on the board. If you're playing some sort of mid-range deck, something like Old School Sorcerer, this is going to be a great fit. And that's not counting any other synergies going on. So now I'm going to finish reading the card, which is, if you consumed an Atronach, instead summon a Storm Atronach. Now, if you consumed an Atronach, might seem like a bit of a stretch, right? How do I make sure I'm consuming an Atronach on curve? Well, on curve, it's going to be a little difficult. You could choose to run Reflective Automaton. That actually would count for this. You could also choose to run the Exalt creature, so the 2/2, but when you pay 5, essentially, he also summons a Flame Atronach, and that could be your 5-drop, and then when they enter that, you play this on 6, so that's entirely relevant. You could also run cards like Mighty Conjuring. In fact, a deck that's running this probably also wants to run Mighty Conjuring. Now, that's not on curve, but if you've either played a Conjurer or a Mighty Conjuring before you've played this Conjurer, then you're going to have Atronachs to hit, right? So the first one, if it's only the Flame Atronach, is still pretty solid, but all future ones kind of become really big threats, especially for the Magicka cost that you are paying, right? It is a very high stats to cost ratio on this card, so I am a fan. I think that it's going to find homes in mid-range decks because it's just resilient, especially if you get the Storm Atronach, because that is a lot of stats, and that's not even counting other synergy. Like the most common, most go-to synergy is if you can play Luzra, right? So if you think about it as you played Mighty Conjuring on turn 7, whether or not you got the Lava Atronach or not, right? If you play Mighty Conjuring on 7 and they answer your threat, then on turn 8 you could drop Luzra into Elfite Conjurer, consuming the Atronach, and you get a monster amount of stats for that kind of magic expenditure. So this is just a quality card. It will see play. It will find home in decks. This is a pretty safe craft. So the next one is, again, one of these themed cards from the mechanics of the new set, Moons of Elsweyr. This one is Queen's Captain. However, this is one that I honestly don't think we'll see a lot of play in true lunar decks where you're trying to get major emphasis on the Waxwing. I think that this one is one of the few that is just versatile enough and good enough to just be slotted into certain decks. When I say certain decks, I think personally this has an argument to be made about being played in either mid-range decks and or control decks. Now, you might scratch your head when I say mid-range, but a long time ago, in a Legends far, far away, there was a time, believe it or not, when Manticora was actually in some mid-range decks. I know that seems weird, but the idea of playing any creature and destroying an opposing creature, I mean, it's a big tempo play if you do that. There's a reason Leaf Lurker was a staple in mid-range for like a year and a half, right? So if this is in your, I'll say like mid-mage deck or mid-tribunal deck, then this essentially takes the slot that the old Manticora would have, but it can also, if you want it to, take the same slot as Wilds Incarnate, as the Moose, because the Moose is there to just be a body that draws you 2 cards. Granted, the stats are a little bit better, but the drawing 2 cards is arguably a little bit more conditional. It's kind of hard to say. So if you wanted to, say, sacrifice the consistency of Wilds Incarnate for some versatility in your game plan, Queen's Captain could certainly fill that slot. In, again, any willpower-based mid-range list, this would work. Now, control-wise, this is also, again, going to kind of take the slot that Manticora used to. It's not going to be as consistent as Manticora used to be because it does not have the guard, but it can do what old Manticora, so like a couple of nerfs ago, used to do, and that's kill a creature cross lane. You do not have to play this into the same lane as the creature you are destroying. So again, I think that the versatility of this card is so strong, with both of the effects being very innately powerful, right? Drawing 2 cards is good. Destroying a creature is good, and I can do one or the other and I get a body left over. This card is solid. So in my opinion, it will find a home, maybe not as a 3-of, but you will see decks that will run this going forward. Mark my words, I think this one is a pretty safe craft as well. So the next one that is on my list might come as a surprise, because it's not a card that I've seen get a lot of fanfare, but it's a card that I think is going to end up being a very big staple in a lot of aggressive decks. And if there's one deck archetype I know, it's aggressive lists. This is Enraged Dragon Knight. This card is a 4-cost 5/4. On summon, you consume a creature to deal 2 damage to each player. This card is very, very good. In fact, it's going to obviously be compared to Afflicted Elite, but the thing is it's better, in my opinion. The 5/4 in stats for 4 is so much better than a 3/1 on 2. The dealing 2 damage to each player is more relevant on turn 4, because traditionally what happens is if you're going first and you have the ring and you just don't have any other 2-drops, you lead off with the Elite, and that tips your hand. It lets your opponent know, okay, I'm playing decks that have Elite, so they don't know, they don't take you down to 26, right? Like they don't sit back and say, okay, I can like get them to 26 and then not break a rune further, which is sometimes the trick you do with Elite, right? You want, as an aggressive deck, to be able to draw more cards. So by waiting to deal that damage to yourself, you might get your opponent to have attacked you down to 26, right? You might have baited them into it. No longer are they thinking, you know, okay, I saw the Elit turn 1, better hold off. So there's a bit more surprise factor. There's also, honestly, just playing both of them. So in the past, you would have to play all 3 of your Elits to self-break a rune, whereas now you're going to have 6 total cards that'll deal 2 damage to yourself, so you're more likely to run into them, more likely to self-trigger a rune break, draw those cards as an aggressive list. It's just, listen, it's a good body, 5-4, very good stats, the 5 attack, very aggressive, you want that. The 4 health does still die to Lightning Bolt, but it does survive Ice Storm, which is very relevant. It does deal direct damage when it enters play, so it's a little bit of reach. It gets around guards when it does said reach, and so on and so forth. So it's just really good at what it does. This is not like a game-breaking card. This is not an oh my god, it's broken card. But when you're looking for something that's just good enough, right? That's solid, that's going to find a home in certain lists, this fits the bill. So it is entirely a safe craft in my opinion. And again, will find home in some aggressive lists. Now, the last card that I'm going to mention is a unique legend. It's the only unique legend in the list, and it's Razumdar. If you were paying attention to spoiler season, you saw this card, and you probably have figured out that it's pretty good. And being that it's a unique legend, it's also pretty safe to craft because you only have to craft 1 of it, so you don't feel bad if something necessarily goes wrong. But Razumdar here, for 7, you get a 4/3 charge. So, you know, you're paying a little bit more than a Cliff Racer, but you also draw a copy of the first card your opponent draws each turn. So unless you like hit a prophecy and this dies before they get to draw a card, at a minimum, this is a 4/3 charge that also draws you a card. That's very, very powerful. You know, if I could take my Cliff Racers and make them go from 5 to 7, but I draw a card, I would consider doing that most of the time. And this card does just that. This card also, I think that one of the things people might be missing right now is it's very good in Unite the Houses decks, because it's one of the few ways you have to get a hold of your opponent's cards when you're trying to find that missing color. And things like Thieves Guild Shadowfoot, for example, have been used for a long time, Rift and Pickpocket and so forth. But this is another way where you can get a hold of your opponent's cards, and that might end up mattering because there's already a few tricks that exist in Agility, and some of the Unite the Houses decks were already running green, so don't sleep on that part of this card by any means. But anyway, the point is, you just get a lot of value here, and it's a unique legendary, so you only have to craft 1 of it. You can feel pretty confident in that regard, and that's it. That's my 5 safe craft cards for Moons of Elsweyr. Now, I do want to throw in one honorable mention at the end. This is somebody who might have cracked the list, but I'm not going to recommend crafting it because they are part of one of the starter decks. So Zumog Foom, I hope I'm saying that right, is a very, you know, solid, unique legend. Has a very interesting effect. It's a 6 cost, 4/6 body and endurance. When he is summoned, you choose another creature, and when that creature dies, you summon a 1/1 version of it. So very useful on cards with you know, summon abilities, very useful on cards with Last Gasp, so on and so forth. This is a card that will find a home in some sort of either combo or control deck because it's very unique in what it does, and so somebody will abuse it. But because it's in one of the starter decks, you can get a hold of this for the low cost of 500 gold. It is a bargain. You get, even if you own all the cards, you get more soul gems than you would have if you had just spent 500 gold on packs. So honestly, you should probably just purchase the starter decks anyway in that regard. But this is my honorable mention. Might have cracked the list, but don't craft this one. Just get the starter decks. So anyway, that's my list. If you made it this far, I appreciate you watching. Until next time, may you walk on warm sands.